You are wearing something right now. You probably put it on without thinking. You chose it in seconds, maybe less. And yet that simple act, pulling fabric over your body, is one of the most radical things your species ever did. Not because of fashion, not because of modesty, but because of a decision made in the cold, long before language, long before cities, long before you. The real reason your ancestors started wearing clothes is far stranger than you think. Let's go back. Around 170,000 years ago, Earth entered one of its coldest periods. Glaciers crept across continents, temperatures dropped, food became scarce. And your ancestors, anatomically modern humans living in southern Africa, were not built for the cold. They had already lost most of their body hair over the previous million years of evolution. That hair loss was actually an advantage once. It helped your body cool down faster during long-distance hunting runs across the African savanna. Your sweat glands multiplied. Your skin became exposed. You became the sweatiest, most heat-efficient hunter on the planet. That was the trade, more cooling, less insulation. But then the cold came back, and suddenly, being a nearly hairless ape was a serious problem. So what did your ancestors do? They looked at the animals around them. Creatures with thick fur. Creatures that survived cold snaps that killed others. And somewhere in the mind of one of your ancestors, a connection formed. If I take that fur, it keeps me warm too. Archaeologist Ian Gilligan at the University of Sydney has spent decades studying the origins of clothing. He argues that the first clothes were not symbolic or social. They were purely thermal. Your ancestors were not trying to cover themselves out of shame. They were trying not to die. The evidence is subtle but real. Bone tools called eyed needles. Tiny, precise instruments used to sew material together appear in the archaeological record around 50,000 years ago. These are not rough scrapers. They are sophisticated, intentional. They tell us that by this point, early humans were not just draping animal hides over their shoulders. They were shaping garments, fitting them to bodies, designing them for warmth and movement. But here's where it gets strange. Scientists studying lice, specifically the tiny parasites that live on human bodies, made a discovery that rewrote the timeline entirely. There are two kinds of lice that live on humans: head lice, which live in hair, and body lice, which live in clothing. These two populations are genetically distinct, and by studying the point at which body lice diverge from head lice, essentially the moment when lice first colonized fabric instead of hair, researchers can estimate when clothing first appeared. The answer came from a 2011 study led by geneticist David Reed at the University of Florida. His team analyzed the DNA of lice from dozens of human populations around the world. The results pointed to a single origin event somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That is when body lice branched off. That is when there was suddenly enough fabric on enough human bodies for a new louse population to establish itself. Think about what that means. Long before the oldest sewn garment, long before the oldest needle, your ancestors had been wearing enough clothing. Consistently enough on enough bodies. For an entire subspecies of parasite to evolve in response. Lice do not lie. The fabric was there, but warmth was only the beginning. Once your ancestors had clothing, something unexpected happened. Clothes began to mean something. They started carrying information. Think about the first moment one human looked at another wearing a decorated hide. A pelt marked with ochre, or strung with shells, or cut in a particular shape, and understood that this person was different. Higher ranking, more skilled, part of a specific group. That moment was the beginning of everything you now call culture, status, and identity. Anthropologist Olga Soffer at the University of Illinois spent years studying impressions left in ancient fired clay, fragments that showed the texture of woven plant fibers from over 27,000 years ago. These were not animal skins. These were deliberately constructed fabrics. She argued that this kind of textile production would have required sustained effort, community knowledge, and specialization. Clothing had stopped being survival equipment. It had become social technology. And your brain noticed, because once clothes became social signals, your ancestors who could read those signals, who could look at what someone was wearing and correctly infer their status, their allegiance, their intentions, those ancestors made better decisions. They formed better alliances. They survived more often. The ability to decode clothing became a cognitive advantage. Your brain was being shaped by fabric. Now add this layer: clothing changed how your ancestors experienced themselves. There is a psychological concept called enclothed cognition. Researchers Hajo Adam and Adam Galinsky at Northwestern University demonstrated in 2012 that what you wear changes how you think. Participants who wore a lab coat described as belonging to a doctor made fewer errors on attention tests than those wearing street clothes or those wearing the same coat, but told it was a painter's smock. The coat was identical. The label changed performance. Your ancestors could not have named this effect, but they lived it. Putting on the hide of a predator, a lion, a wolf, a bear, changed how a hunter moved, how he breathed, how he felt going into danger. Clothes were not just thermal protection or social signaling. They were psychological tools. They changed who you became when you wore them. And then, much later, came the idea that would alter clothing forever: shame. Evolutionary psychologists debate exactly when and why humans developed a consciousness of bodily exposure as something that required covering. Some researchers argue it was a byproduct of social complexity. As communities grew larger and the stakes of sexual competition increased, bodies became more charged, more politically significant. Others point to evidence that the shift was gradual, tied to the increasing importance of pair, bonding and mate, guarding in human social structures. What is clear is that by the time your ancestors were building permanent settlements, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, clothing had fused with identity, morality, gender, and group membership in ways that were inseparable from the social order itself. Clothes stopped being about cold. They became about who you were allowed to be. And that has never changed. Right now, the clothes you are wearing are broadcasting a signal. Your brain chose them or accepted them because of a cascade of social information your mind has been processing since childhood. The colors, the cut, the brand, the context. You did not just choose comfort. You chose a version of yourself to present to the world. Your ancestors did the same thing. The first time one of them wrapped a hide around their shoulders to survive a cold night, they could not have imagined what they were starting. A million-year chain of decisions that led, eventually, to you, standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a collar, choosing a self. You are wearing something right now, and now you know exactly how ancient that habit is, and how much it has always said about you.